Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live. She pioneered a direct-to-consumer genetic testing kit that will go public this year after navigating a global pandemic. CEO Anne Wojcicki joins us to talk innovation, leadership, and growing a company through COVID. Plus, on this Earth Day, we take a look at President Biden's recent Green Pledge and what it means for business. All that next. Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. Today, we're sitting down with 23&Me's Anne Wojcicki, but first, let's take a look at the top headlines trending right now on LinkedIn. Vaccine demand may soon hit a wall, retail hiring at a rapid pace, and Biden wants to cut greenhouse gas emissions by half. Let's take a deeper look into that story. President Biden is hoping to reach this target by 2030. He's hosting 40 world leaders today in a conference on climate to underscore the urgency and economic benefits of tackling global warming more urgently. Joining us now to discuss is Jake Perez. He's news editor for us here at LinkedIn. Jake, break down this pledge, cutting it by half by 2030. What is that really going to look like?
Well, it's actually, the big headline is what you mentioned, right? That the U.S. is going to actually double its stated goals for cutting greenhouse gases. So rather than being 26 to 28%, now it can be as high as 52% by 2030. And the summit itself, the two-day virtual summit, is pretty notable in the fact that 40 heads of state are involved, and it allows some reassurance that the U.S. is back in the climate accord in the Paris Climate Accord in a major way, and it also it basically provides leverage from the U.S. to other countries to up their game in terms of fighting climate change.
You mentioned the 40 world leaders that Biden's meeting with today and during this summit tomorrow as well, but this business community is behind this as well. This comes after more than 400 corporate leaders asked Biden to double the emission reduction targets. Can you give us some details of what they propose, why it's important to them?
Yeah, this is really interesting too, in that it's 400 business leaders and investors taking a stand on climate change. And it's basically that Biden is doing, that this particular consortia of leaders are getting exactly what they asked for in this open letter that they issued to President Biden. But the leaders themselves are taking it a step further and saying that they want to reach a net zero on carbon emissions by 2050.
Mm-hmm. And I think there may be some people who are joining us in the stream who might think that climate change it's job killers. Once you start thinking about sustainability, jobs are going to go away. But is that really true?
Well, I think that in this particular case, what we're seeing is more of a tipping point for sort of acceptance of climate change as an issue. The 400 leaders that signed this open letter to President Biden are from across the political spectrum. So you're seeing buy-in from all different sides of this, which is really key. And so I think what you're seeing is that, whether or not companies agree with sort of climate change as a moral issue, they at the very least see it as a good business decision.
Great. Jake, thank you for breaking down this accord for us, and thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.
Pleasure.
That was Jake Perez. He's LinkedIn news editor for us here. And for more stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. In 2006, Anne Wojcicki pioneered direct-to-consumer genetic testing with the launch of 23&Me, and now is working to crowdsource a database of information to power its research into the genetic causes and potential treatments of disease. She's doing all of this while taking the company public via SPAC, and under the backdrop of a global pandemic. She just joins us now to discuss this and more. Anne, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Thanks for having me.
You're a busy lady, so I appreciate you taking the time. We just mentioned some of the things that you're working on. I'm looking forward to discussing them. Let's start with this SPAC. You were insistent for quite some time that 23&Me needed to stay private in order to be successful. So why go public now? Why via SPAC?
A couple of reasons. I tell people all the time that going public is not necessarily the glory and the outcome people should be striving for. If people are solving for liquidity in this world, there's other ways to have liquidity. But being public means you're on a bigger stage. And at the right time, when the companies are mature, I do think it's appropriate. And I do think the regulation and all the reasons, all the benefits that you get and all the reasons why it's hard to be public makes sense. So for us, we're 15 years old, and it started to feel like we're at we're established enough with our brand, our core values, that you can really withstand the pressure that you're going to get as a public company. And that always was the most important thing for me, is making sure that we were mature enough of a company to withstand that pressure. The SPAC route is really interesting because it gives you the flexibility of really being able to, it's a little bit faster potentially, and it allows you to, give more forward-looking guidance, and it allows you to pick an investor or investors that you're going to work with. So it's a super interesting path that I think is, I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, it's definitely the trend of the moment, but coming from your seat as a founder and as a CEO, what exactly about the process was more attractive than, say, going to IPO? And if, let's say, SPAC wasn't an option, do you think that 23andMe would be going public at this time?
I think we had it was a combination of some of we definitely had it on our radar that, would we consider going public, but it wasn't a top priority for me. But frankly, when we were approached and the opportunity of working with Richard Branson was incredibly appealing. And frankly, it just kind of started to realize, when I look at the maturity of the business and the needs that we're going to have to, have access to capital to accelerate our therapeutic side, and the opportunities that we see right now on the consumer side, it just really made sense. So the opportunity to work with Richard Branson, I think, was, phenomenal for us. And I think that it's this is the right kind of path for a company like 23andMe, where so much of, we're just, to quote Jeff Bezos, like, it really is just day one. We're just at the beginning of everything that we think we can do.
And you mentioned the opportunities for your consumer business right now. I'm curious how the pandemic has shifted the focus of what you're working on. Certainly, healthcare is now front and center for a lot of people who may not have been thinking about this before. Walk us through a little bit the opportunities that you see for the business under the pandemic and under the weight of this year.
Well, it's really the pandemic has ushered in this era of virtual care. And it's really, people in those early days, especially when you couldn't go out at all, everyone had to start thinking about, how are you going to get care from your house? And frankly, it's a much more pleasant experience for people. And there's all kinds of aspects of care that can be delivered at home or remotely through telemedicine. And so everything, there's always been a history of, regulatory reasons why it can't happen. And, just consumer acceptance, and everything changed. So it's a really exciting opportunity, because the potential for adopting truly sort of a digital care, virtual care, has been dramatically accelerated. And I think if we're really going to, adopt technology in healthcare, it cannot all be predicated onto one-on-one interaction with a physician. You have to find, more scalable, technology-driven ways that you can deliver care. So I think it's an exciting time.
Certainly. And for those who are joining us in the stream and maybe don't know enough about 23andMe to understand how you guys could plug into something like virtual care, could you walk us through that?
Sure. 23andMe allows people to get access to their genetic information. And the people talk all the time about personalized care, personalized medicine. And what is personalized medicine? It's kind of, I draw the analogy with Netflix. If people, when everyone signs up for a Netflix account or, again, some other service, it's personalized to you. Not everyone has the exact same experience. And that's exactly what we are looking to do in healthcare, is how do you make each person unique on day one? And you do that with your genetic information, that everyone is fundamentally has different risks that are based on their genetics. And someone might be higher risk for type 2 diabetes, somebody might be higher risk for chronic kidney disease, someone might be higher risk for breast cancer. So how do you start to have a care that integrates genetic information? Francis Collins stated in 2003 that genetic information has the potential to transform all of the prediction, the prevention, and the treatment of all human disease. And that really is what we are ushering in. And I now have 11 million customers who have their genetic information, and we want to help them use that information to get better healthcare.
Great. And I'm going to go ahead and say hello to some members who are joining us. We have Steve from San Diego, Martha from Ireland, Mario from Memphis, and Helen's joining us from New Haven, Connecticut. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm here with Anne Wojcicki. She's the CEO of 23&Me. And we want to hear from you. What questions do you have for Anne? Have you done genetic testing? Have you done a 23&Me kit like I have? If you have, let's have a conversation about that on today's show. And she's leading this company through a pandemic. So if you have any questions about leadership right now during this time, let's get to those as well. And let's talk big picture here. Of course, your goal with 23&Me isn't just to, tell people that they might have an aversion to cilantro, which I do. And I was glad that I had that confirmation because it's something that people think is made up. So I really appreciate the data there. But in all seriousness, you have a big vision here, a vision that this genetic information could potentially lower the cost of creating drugs, could potentially help drug makers get this information quicker. How is that going? Where are you in terms of that goal, and how are partnerships going with companies like GlaxoSmithKline, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Two things on this. So first, the human genome is fascinating. And it's fascinating because all of life comes from 4 base pairs. You have an A, C, G, and T. And the combination of that could yield a banana, it could yield a slug, or it could yield a human. And it's so amazing to me that the human genome in some ways is so simple. And so I've always had this personal passion. I just want to understand it. This is the human code. How do you understand it? And like all good engineering problems, if you really understand how something works, then you can understand how can you, fix it or modify it or evolve it. So the core goal of the company here is how do you understand why, the human genetic code and why we are humans and why we have this diversity that we have. So a core thing that we do now, we have 11 million customers. Over 80% of them have consented and opted into research. They fill out surveys, we collect more and more information, and we're able to do research studies. And we do 2 things. We either can put that back into the consumer product and keep making the consumer product more interesting for customers. And that could be things like our cilantro study, which you mentioned. So more information going back to our consumer. Or we're also trying to really understand human disease. And when you understand it, then you have the opportunity to potentially develop therapies to treat it. So we did sign a large collaboration with GSK. We have a number of programs that are going forward. Over 40 programs are underway in various stages of research. And we have one program that is actually now in humans. And I'm super enthused. We've looked at, if you look at some of the data that's out there, if you start with human genetic data, you are more than twice as likely to be successful. So that is also the fundamental reason why we started doing drug discovery, is because we believe because we're starting with data, we are more likely to be successful with the end goal of actually having therapies that come onto the market.
But Anne, as you mentioned, as you call it, this personal passion of yours, it hasn't come without its challenges, certainly in the last 16 years. I think back to when there was issues with FDA approval to shut down your business for a couple of years. You've been wading through some privacy concerns as well. What's kept you motivated towards this goal? I'm sure we have many people joining us in the stream who may see that their passion project isn't working out right now. What's kept you so motivated to ensure that this long-term vision becomes real life?
I think that the thing that's interesting for me is that when you talk to people about the healthcare system, no one, and literally no one will ever raise their hand and say, I love the system. Like it's amazing, like from investors to politicians to others, like no one's out there saying like, oh, we have the best healthcare. And what I really like, the reason why I come in every day and I do this is because I think that we really change people's lives with genetic information. And people write in all the time and say how meaningful it is that they learned something about their ancestry that filled a hole for them, or they reconnected with family members. And I mean, almost on a daily basis, I get an email from people saying like, oh, I found my family members. Or we get people who write in who say, your health information saved my life or changed it or allowed me to have better care. So like when you get an email like that, or you realize the impact of how much it's not just bringing a little increment of happiness, like it's fundamental to their soul of like what's really most important in life. And that is, the connections in your family and the quality of your health. So I think that's where, like, when I think about the ultimate goal, it really is, I think we can have an impact on humanity of helping people recognize that we're all 99.5% the same, and fundamentally we're all connected. And so there's a family component. You're really bringing people together. And secondly, I think there's nothing better than being healthy at 100.
Right.
You don't want to be actively managed. You want to be healthy.
Right. Well, on a personal note, my brother-in-law actually found out that he had a half sister he didn't know about through a 23&Me. So I can imagine that that's happening. You're getting those emails daily. More members are joining us, and we have Tim from New York, Rodney from South Africa, Debbie from Vancouver, and a question for you here from Sacha. He wants to know, do you expect that insurance companies will be expecting tests such as 23&Me as a prerequisite moving forward?
There's something called there's a bill out there that prevents people from using genetic information from preventing you from getting health insurance or from employment. And so that is, I don't imagine at any point that your health insurance company is going to require this. So there is not protection for life insurance, but it's not necessarily a requirement for getting health insurance. So that said, I absolutely do see a world at some point where you're going to want your provider, your physician, to know whether or not you are at higher risk for a certain kind of condition, because that could improve your care. Great. So the bill that's out there is called GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, if anyone wants to research it.
All right, Sacha, now you know where to go and get more information there. Mm-hmm. And let's switch gears a little bit and just talk about leadership through this pandemic. On LinkedIn News Live, we've talked to so many CEOs who've had to guide their business through this pandemic. I'm curious, what's been the biggest challenge for you this past year?
The challenge, I think in some ways, is always the uncertainty. When we looked in March, and we're on we end our year in March, and so we do a lot of planning then. In March, it was just terrifying. And I think it was really unclear, how do you run a business when you don't know, are you going to enter into a great recession? And frankly, I never would have expected the stock market and the economy to do what it's doing right now. So in some ways, it's been almost a monthly kind of navigating, what is the world doing? What does the world need? And, how can we react to that? So I think that has fundamentally been the biggest challenge, is the uncertainty. The thing that I think has surprised me the most that has not been a challenge is the work from home. And I think you see all kinds of CEOs who have who've recognized this and recognize now that there is an opportunity to have a flexible work environment. And not only is that productive, but it's much better. And I think the thing I'm really happy about is in some ways, the rise of understanding of neurodiversity and the importance of allowing people with neurodiversity to have flexible work environments. Not everyone needs to come in every day. And so I think that's, in some ways, that's the biggest surprise that I've come, is like just how effective we can be remotely.
Well, on a small note, I read in a Forbes article that you are typically late to meetings. And I was curious, as we've switched to this remote environment, if that stands true, or if you're finding that you are maybe on time a little bit more because of the flexibility of work.
I am definitely on time more. I'm late now for different reasons. Before in the office, I would be late because someone would catch me in the hallway, and I'm fundamentally too social of a person to ever just cut it off. And now I have this issue. Like I was late coming into you because I now have my 3 little people who live with me, my children, who like me, thankfully, and they wanted me to be around. So now it's usually like, oh, well, someone wants food, or they need help with something, or like their shoes on, or so. Well, anyways, I try better now.
I'm sure there are tons of working mothers in the stream right now who are resonating and nodding along as you're talking about that. But speaking of those 3 little humans, but also your family in general, if you're just joining us in the stream, where I'm here with 23&Me's Anne Wojcicki, you come from a super established, super credible family who's just doing a bunch of amazing things. Your sister Janet is an epidemiologist and an anthropologist. Susan, of course, is the CEO of YouTube, and your mother, Esther, is a famed college professor and author. How have you been leaning on them? How have you been talking to them about leadership during this time?
Well, Susan and I, in the early days, we had a really great time where we would collaborate. We would discuss like all the various new techniques in mopping the house. Like that was actually really fun, where we said like, there's no help. You got to figure out how can you clean and also run the company in the most efficient ways. So there was some fun with my sisters about thinking about how can you actually structure a household so you can be productive, but also get everyone to chip in and help and clean in the best way. Now not even just in the pandemic, but I rely on my family all the time. And my sister, Janet, the epidemiologist, actually lives with me. And so we're kind of, co-parent kids together. And I rely on her to, watch my kids while I can go and shower and, do things. And obviously she's kind of my in-house epidemiologist that tells me whether or not I can invite people over. And then Susan, I talk to all the time about how she is managing, how she's grown. I mean, Susan is just, I'm so lucky because Susan is just such a phenomenal sister as well as executive. And so I get her input all the time about challenging situations and how she would manage it. So I, at the end of the day, they're always still just my sisters. And we still fight over basic things like you took my shorts and, it's kind of fun. Nothing's really changed, but Susan and Jen are the same. They've always been incredibly supportive siblings and they just continue to be so now.
Well, it's comforting for me that even someone who in many ways is at the pinnacle of their career still fight over those simple things with people such as your sisters.
You have no idea what we fight about.
Well, Anne, we have a lot of people joining us in this stream who are on, just starting out, maybe starting their careers right now. And I wanted to actually show something that you said in an interview in 2015 about careers that I think the people in the stream will find particularly insightful.
Okay.
When I talk to people in their 20s, I think about finding things that you're interested in, but being okay to quit and move on. And I think that's where I'm always shocked at people who are in their 20s who are afraid of quitting. And I'm it's the best time. You should try. Don't be afraid to actually try switching jobs.
I love that. Well, funny enough, just so you know, I was in the audience for that interview 5 years ago with Patty Sellers. She's a great mentor of mine. But I wanted to bring that up, not just because I was there when you said that, but because there was a New York Times article earlier this week that said that millennials are in fact doing that. And so we polled professionals on the LinkedIn news page to get their sense of, are they considering leaving their jobs right now? And it looks like this is a trend that's happening more. We have about 40% who are considering it, but only 20% have done it. And particularly at this point in the pandemic, for those who are joining us who are maybe considering a career shift right now early in their careers, how would your message change, from what you said 6 years ago, if at all?
I think, people, when I was graduating school and trying to figure out a job, and people used to tell me Anne, you have to do something every day, so you might as well love what you do. And that really, when it is a passion project, so for me, 23&Me is absolutely a passion. It never feels like work going into the office. I never wake up in the morning and dread it. And I had 1 year of working in one of my financial jobs where it felt like work. And I remember saying, I never want to do that again. And so there's two pieces of advice I'd have for people. One, not everyone has a passion, but when you're learning, it helps you figure out what your passions are. So I always encourage people to just keep taking, if you're not learning anymore in a job or you don't enjoy it, then leave, find something new, and that's okay. And the most important skill I got from my parents was about how can you live in a frugal way? Because you're fundamentally free if you've managed your cash well. And so my first job in New York, when I thought I was never going to make more than $40,000, I decided I was going to save $1,000 a month. And so I was really, vigilant about this. I had $15 a month, $15 a week that I would use for food, and I managed that. So I had that ability and flexibility to say, if I want to quit, I can. And so that's one thing I find. People often are caught in their jobs because they're afraid to quit because they're afraid of the financials. But if you have this ability to keep trying new projects and figure out what your passions are, and you know how to manage your money, then you have that flexibility to really figure out what do you want to do.
Well, and I'll take you by your word that when you wake up in the morning, no day feels like dread, or that, because this is your passion, this is something that you're excited to do. But for those who are maybe in a job, you've been through challenging days, of course. There have been days where it's been really difficult. How do you distinguish it just being hard work versus something that you're dreading to do for someone who may be considering a career shift right now?
I mean, look, I love problem solving. And so I think it's even when people ask us all the time about the FDA days, and that wasn't dread for me. That was really hey, there's a roadblock and now I have to figure this out. I need to think about it's about problem solving. So when it's no longer, when getting to the conclusion of the problem is not exciting for you, then it's not the right job. But I could clearly look at saying, for me, getting to the end of the FDA, like figuring out how are we going to do this was going to fundamentally be exciting to me. And so, but if I had gotten to the end and I wasn't excited about the outcome, then it's not the right job anymore. And so I think that's where there's a difference when the resolution of that problem, is it going to be interesting for you or not?
I love that. If the problem you're trying to solve is not exciting for you, maybe it's time to think about a different opportunity. And thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I can tell by the stream that we've learned so much from your insights. We appreciate you taking the time.
I so enjoyed it. I loved it. And this is actually a great channel for encouraging people to keep trying different things. So
absolutely.
I think more people finding their passions and experimenting. I mean, the reality is that live life. It's so exciting.
I love that. What a great note to end on. Thank you, Anne. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Enjoy. Thanks.
That was Anne Wojcicki. She's CEO of 23&Me, sharing her insights on leading the company through this pandemic and eventually going public via SPAC. All right, tomorrow on LinkedIn News Live, you'll be here with Get Hired. My colleague Andrew Seaman is speaking with one expert on how to navigate the interview process from start to finish. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thanks so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.